What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Star Wars Explained. Today, we are going to be joined by a returning guest, the author of The Eye of Darkness, George Mann. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Last time, we did not talk spoilers, but it's been a couple weeks since the book has come out. We are going to be talking spoilers today, so just be warned if you haven't finished the book. We're going to dive into some actual details.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start off because last time we talked about your love of mythology, and I'm curious if you took any inspirations from mythologies while you were writing The Eye of Darkness, if any specific characters or events would point back to something in a real world mythology.
Interesting. So I think actually more than anything else, it's kind of self-referential in the sense that, the High Republic has been going for several years now. We've or quite a few years, in fact. There's the whole of Phase 1, the whole of Phase 2. So this was an opportunity to try and do what I do with mythologies with the content that we already had within the High Republic. So you'll see in the book, there's characters like Porter and his story arc. Aside from the fact Porter kind of is a bit of an archetype of kind of the wandering Ronin anyway. So you're calling on that mythology in and of itself. There's the connections to Phase 2, for example, where the search for the EX droid components because he thinks he's going to find a way out, and obviously ultimately does help find a way out of the occlusion zone with that technology. So what I wanted to do with this book was try and pull on all the threads that we'd already set up in or at least as many as I could get my hands around in the High Republic, and use the High Republic, and particularly the Phase 2, which is at this point 200 years ago, to be that mythology, and what's interesting about doing that is you've got these long-lived characters like the General, like Porter, who've got memories of these things. So to a lot of the world at that point, the Nameless are a myth, and to the Jedi, aside from those few Jedi who know the truth, who were there during Phase 2 and saw what happened with the Path of the Open Hand and the Leveler, and even then there wasn't that many, and they didn't talk about it. They were under strict orders not to talk about it. So I think that's really interesting when a series has reached that point where it's actually self-mythologizing. I think that's a really interesting to play with as a creator and a writer, to get because again, it helps reinforce that depth. One of the interesting things, some of the early reviews for the book have talked about, now I understand what was going on in Phase 2. Now I see the relevance of Phase 2 to the overall story. And let me tell you, you haven't seen it all yet. But Phase 2 is very relevant to the story. I know there were people who kind of were shocked by what we did, going back in time, leaving these characters like Avar and Elzar at this terrible point where Starlight Beacon's crashed, and they've lost, and everything's going wrong. And then we cut back a couple hundred years and start telling these stories with other characters, and it was a shock for quite a lot of people. But hopefully, as Phase 3 continues, and starting with the Eye of Darkness, people are seeing now that actually there is relevance to those stories, and that it's all going to become part of one big story, and that what the characters are doing in Phase 3 is very much informed by some of what happened in Phase 2, and how those stories have influenced them almost as mythology in and of themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I loved the whole subplot with the EX droid and the knowledge of what they were, why they could get past the occlusion zone. I've also seen some people stating that they went back after finishing Phase 2 to read Phase 1, and they're like, "Oh man, they seeded so much stuff."
Yeah.
I haven't had the time to do that yet, but I really want to, just to see how it feels very meticulously planned and rewarding as a reader.
I think meticulously planned, yes, but also I think we've got a good team who are able to roll with the creativity and and fold it in and develop it as it moves as well. So we've got these kind of like tent poles, and then we've also got kind of like the ball that's bouncing around between them, and we're all keeping it within the like a pinball, you know. And Mike Siglain, we've got to speak to Mike Siglain. You know, he's a master at coordinating all of that, keeping us on track, making sure everything fits as the story develops. So yeah, I think when we get to the end of this, I think there's going to be a really interesting exercise in going back and reading them all again, and also I think there's going to be years worth of debate about the best reading order.
Just yeah,
phase 2. Do you start with phase 1?
Just like Star Wars.
Exactly that. But that's part of the fun, isn't it? I mean, that's the fun of being a fan. You can get involved in those conversations, and I'm really interested to go into it again as a reader once it's finished and find that out for myself.
Yeah, and honestly, spending over a year away from the Phase 1 characters, it made, I think, the events of the Fallen Star and the crash of Starlight Beacon, it made all that feel a little more impactful, and knowing like the tension of what's the state of the galaxy going to be like at the start of Phase 3 a year later.
Yeah.
I think it felt even better to return to that time of crisis. And we still didn't have to have like a gap of a year in storytelling. We still got all the Phase 2. So
exactly. You know, I think you know, it was an interesting move and a clever move. I think it's like, hopefully people coming to Eye of Darkness are really hungry to revisit these characters, and hopefully they're going to find themselves satisfied with the story we're telling. You know, it's just part 1 of the bigger picture, but you know, it's our first time back with these characters for a while.
How did you go about planning which characters would appear in the Eye of Darkness? Is that something that you all discussed together? Like, and obviously you can only focus on so many, but I liked the characters you chose, and I appreciated that you also gave us little hints of like what Reith, Silas, or Emmerich were up to.
Yeah, well, thanks. I think so. Yeah, it's an interesting balance, because writing a book like this, is on one hand, it's a very personal experience, like writing any book. It's your book. You know, you're telling a story. You're speaking to the themes. You're inside those characters' heads. On the other hand, you know, we have a writer's room essentially who are planning the overall story, the overall trajectory. So there's a lot that a book like this has to do. It has to tell a story in and of itself, but it also has to hit certain beats that are setting things up for the writer who's going to take the baton next, and then the writer after that. Of course, we know where things are going to, as writers, as the part of the team, we know where things are going to end. So you're thinking about that a lot, and you're thinking, well, okay, so I have to set this up. I have to, not just in terms of like story points in the plot, but characters. And I have, you know, if a character's going on a journey, well, we have to show that journey. So it's my you know, role to kind of figure out, okay, well, this is where they start, and this is the journey they, you know, I know the journey they're going to go on in the next two books, or however many books, because there's the YA books and the middle grade and the comics, and all of it is part of the bigger tapestry. So we're thinking about all of this stuff, which is why you get those little hints like what Reith's doing, what Emmerich's doing, because, you know, you're setting the seed, you're making the galaxy feel bigger, but also you're setting seeds for future storytelling, either by myself or someone else. And I do obviously help myself a little bit by going, okay, I'll put a seed in there because I know what I'm going to be doing in Tears of the Nameless. So I'm going to make sure I've seeded something in that's going to help me. But you know, we do that for each other as well. So there was a lot of discussion about the story arcs in the different books and how they, in the different kind of series of books. So, you know, what's happening in the adult novels to take us towards the end point? What's happening in the YA books? What's happening in the middle grade books, etc., etc. And we talk about that as a team. So we know who are the major characters and what roles do we need them to play in, for example, the adult books. So we know Ava and Elzar are going to be huge, important parts of the story. Of course they are. They have been through all of phase 1. They're going to be through all of phase 3. We hope. That's not a spoiler. But you know, so it's obvious in some ways what characters you have to address. Certainly the big characters. You know, we need to know what Marky and Rose up to, and and who's in his camp and what they're doing. And you know, so that's where Gira comes in. It's like it, you know, that was their decisions we take as a group. Avar and Elzar being separated across the occlusion zone barrier. That's a decision we take as a group. We know where we want them to start this phase. Other than that, then it becomes a more of a kind of like personal choice where I kind of go, okay, so these are the broad strokes of the story we've agreed. This is where the characters start. This is where they need to end the book. There are certain subplots and other kind of things that I want to do within the book. So you kind of go, well, okay, I want a character who's like P.G. Wodehouse was during the Second World War. You know, he's being forced to broadcast propaganda. You know, that's where Rill comes in. So you go, okay, that's something that I wanted to add to the story. So I kind of go, okay, I put Rill behind enemy lines and trapped in that position because that's a story I wanted to tell. We knew we wanted to feature Bell and Burry, but we didn't really have a story for Bell and Burry as a group for this book. So I kind of went, right, okay, I'm going to figure out what that story is. And then you kind of go back to the group and you talk it through. And you're like, this is the plan I've developed for these guys. Are you happy with it? Does that fit with where you might need to take them in other stories or other storytelling? Or does it contradict anything that you guys are doing? Or, you know, has anyone got any major objections? And you have those discussions and then you go away and you work it in. So there are, you know, Melis Shrike is a character that kind of comes up. She lives and dies within this book, you know. But she was there purposefully to be an antagonist for Bell, really, be the kind of the focal point of his anger and where he's at. You know, because like that's again, you know, you talk about the characters. You go, where's Bell at the start of this phase? And we all know he's pretty angry. He's in a pretty bad place. Yeah. Okay, I mean they're all in a pretty bad place, but Bell is particularly has that kind of these anger issues, always, you know. So you kind of go, okay, then it's my job to tell that story. So what's the best way for me to tell that story? And I kind of, well, I need to create a focal point for that anger, like, and show how Bell is on a journey that kind of where it could become all about revenge if he didn't have Burry with him, basically Burry and Ember with him. That's what that story is. It's like Bell could fall down a very bad hole, and I'm not talking about the dark side, but I mean, you know, like a dangerous path that might lead him to make mistakes. And what Burry's there to do for his friend is keep him on the right track. So that becomes then. So to see how that works, you know, we've had this conversation about the character being at a point where he's angry about what's happened. What I kind of then do is go, all right, I'll make that into a story. I'll give that a focal point and a direction and a subplot within the book. So that's how the decisions come about with the characters. You've got some that you have to kind of use because they're obviously the characters everyone's crying out to see again, that the core story needs you to feature. And then there are other characters where you kind of go, this would be a nice cameo, or this would be a great subplot character, you know, or this is going to allow me to make these connections back to phase 2 that I really want to make in this book. So that's where you start to connect the dots.
You actually made me pull my notes back up that I took while reading the book, because Bell and Burry's story, watching him just kind of like slowly losing his way to revenge and violence, and Burry kind of having to pull him back. The idea of like this slow fall came up a lot for me in the book. I think Elzar said something like the momentum of the war is like a slow death. We saw a Grand Master of the Order experiencing kind of a slow death from the Nameless. And I guess a lot of Star Wars fans, myself included, have thought that this is kind of going to show us a transition of the Jedi at their height to a point where they can start to slowly be corrupted and be in a position where someone like a secret Sith Lord who's in the Senate could take them over and corrupt them further. I just thought that was a really great theme that you dug throughout the book.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, you know, I'm interested to see where the Acolyte leads as well. Because I think that's Leslie's talked about that being set later, about more towards that kind of point where we're crossing between where they are in the Jedi are in the High Republic and where they're going to be when we see them in the prequel trilogy. I think here it's about. I mean, they're just people. At the end of the day, they're like, yes, they've got kind of super heroic abilities. They can use the Force, but actually they're just people, and they're people who believe strongly in an ideal. But that ideal can be a strength and it can be a weakness, and it can in itself corrupt, not in a kind of, again, not in a dark side sort of way, but in a way that kind of you can become blinded to what you need to do or how the world really is, because you've got this idealistic version of it. And I think what's happened when you hit Eye of Darkness is the Jedi have faced a great challenge to, when you see them at the start of Light of the Jedi, and the start of the High Republic comic, it's the dedication ceremony for Starlight Beacon. They are the beacon of hope for the galaxy. They're at the top of their game. Nothing can knock them off that point. And then it does. And then Markin Rowe comes along and he knocks them sideways. And he presents them with true fear, existential fear, as well as kind of physical fear. Something can shake the galaxy in a way that the Jedi never thought it could, and they're not as strong as they thought they were. That puts you in a pretty scary head place as one of these kind of saber carrying characters. So that's exactly what I wanted to do with Eye of Darkness. I wanted to show you this kind of, the Jedi aren't fractured. They're still the Jedi Order. They're still a unit, but at the same time they're operating as individuals with different approaches to how to solve the Nihil problem. They've all got an idea. Bell wants to be out there on the frontier beating them back. Elzar wants to do a full assault on the Stormwall. Yoda wants them to really focus on the Nameless and try and solve the problem almost in an academic way. The Council are saying, "No, we've got to stick to Coruscant. We've put these Guardian protocols in. You can't go out on these missions, and it's too risky. We can't risk the Order." And then you've got Avar, inside the Occlusion Zone, seeing what's going on, seeing the horrors, and trying to revert back to how she was before she had these big titles. She's like, actually being the hero of Hetzel didn't work for her. Huge pressure, and all she can see now is the failure of that, because Starlight Beacon went down, Stellan died. She's failed in that respect. So she's trying to almost revert to how she was when she was a younger Jedi Knight. Like she's kind of convinced herself that little cumulative wins will mount up to something bigger. But actually it's not. It's not. And what she needs to do is get back on the horse. She needs to kind of recognize, no, okay, I do need to be that leader. I need to believe in myself, and I need to believe in the Order. And I think that's an indicator of the journey that I think the Jedi need to make in Phase 3. They need to recognize that actually we need to pull together to win this.
And I think you did a great job of showing that there is no one just easy answer. Like, I didn't find myself reading all these different points of view and I was frustrated at one member of the Jedi Council or anything. I was like, well, they're all making good points. It's just an impossible situation.
It's death by 1,000 cuts. There's and the truth is, I mean, I hope the book has a satisfying trajectory in it. And we have, like I always say, hope is at the core of Star Wars, and you get that moment of hope with Avar's escape. But it is just one person escaping from the Occlusion Zone at this point. That's the win is small. But what it does is it's a pointer. It's a victory that they need at that point to help them consolidate. It's showing them, actually, no, we can do this. We can do this.
But within that, can I ask, how dare you do that to Porter Engle? We leave him on a cliffhanger. Like, we just got Barry back, and then you're gonna leave Porter on a cliffhanger.
Sorry, that's my bad. Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to that beyond, there are more books. You might find out what happens, you might not.
Uh-huh. It's Bury all over again.
Sorry. Yeah.
Uh, within all of the Jedi and their various attempts to solve the problem, I was not expecting diplomacy with the Nile to be one. How did that plot line develop? Because it seems like they're just they're a group of people that don't really want to be diplomatic
Yeah.
outside of Gira.
Well, exactly, and I think that's where the story comes from, because it's the tension in the Nile camp. It's the fracturing of Gira and Marco and Rose's relationship is what you're seeing. You know, for me, writing the book, there was a scene, and I don't know if anyone's. It's such a minor thing, really, but there's a scene in that book, the conversation between Marco and Ro and Gira, that was absolutely pivotal in me unlocking what the book was actually about. And it's the scene where Marky and Ro basically says to Gera, by winning, I've lost, because I've realized that to win, I had to become my enemy. And by that, he's talking about, like, I don't want to be a governor of 100 worlds, 1,000 worlds. I don't want to run a government. I don't want to be a stable economy. I don't want to be worrying about import and export, and taxes. He's an agent of chaos. That's his role in for himself, and in the stories. He's the unpredictable. We don't spend a lot of time in Markion's head, and there's a reason for that, because it's a painful experience. You like Markion is you shouldn't know what Markion wants next, because he's that character who is unpredictable. And what Gira is trying to do is then, like, this isn't sustainable. Chaos brought us to this point because you were unpredictable, and the Jedi didn't know what to expect, and they didn't know how to handle you and fight back against you, and that's how you've won. But now you've won, we need to change. The Nihil need to become something else. She's organized them into ministries. She's trying to reach out to the Republic, and the Republic don't really want to do business with the Nile, but also they have a responsibility to billions of people on all these worlds, both within and without the Occlusion Zone, to find a way towards peace. So they're not giving up, but it has to be one weapon in the arsenal of and it raises the question, like, can we defeat Markion Ro with diplomacy? Mm-hmm. Doesn't work out too well in the book, but it's something they have to try, I think, as reluctant as they are. And it doesn't work for Gira as well, and there's that kind of gloating from Markion to Gira. They sent you back with your tail between your legs, didn't they? They don't want to do business with us. The truth is they can't, because Markion Ro's in charge, and he's too unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, you sent me back to my notes again. Something I wrote down was just the difference between the Sith and the Nile, where they're still very much rooted in what George Lucas talked about as the dark side, which is basically just short-term pleasure. It's unsustainable, it's destructive, and it sets the Nile apart from the Sith, because at least the Sith Order has, like, a long-term plan, and Markion doesn't really seem to. He's just going to do what feels good in the moment, and then he's like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. I mean, no one knows what he's going to do next, not least Gira, who's sleeping with him. She's supposed to be his number two. She doesn't know what's going on in his head, and that's truly scary. I think that's the genius of what the guys set up originally with the Nile. They're not the Sith. And I think that's one of the things I really wanted to again get under the skin of, was how do these guys operate, because they're not like the Sith, they're not like the baddies we've seen in Star Wars before, and that's why they're so scary. They're not the opposite of the Jedi. Well, I mean, in some ways they are. I suppose you can look at, like, the chaos of Markion Ro and the Jedi Order. It's in the name, they're ordered, but in other ways, it's not light versus dark in the same way.
Well, we are going to start wrapping up here, but you've mentioned a couple times you've got Tears of the Nameless on the way. You're writing it right now. Since it's phase 3, I know there's nothing you can give us that's solid, but for phase 3, can you tease anything about it in 3 words or less?
Yeah. I'll give you 3 words. Wreath, Aslin, fear.
I already love that. Aslan Rel, very quick. He was my guess for who the person in the bandages was at the end of Midnight Horizon. So I
Right.
felt vindicated for that, but then also the way he's depicted in Shadows of Starlight was beyond what I was expecting.
Yeah,
So
we worked hard on that reveal, and obviously, you get him again briefly in Eye of Darkness.
mhm.
So yeah, there's a hint. More Aslin.
And I love Wreath Silas.
Me too.
And Fear just sounds like it'll be a par for the course in High Republic.
Well, when you're dealing with the Nameless, what more can you expect?
Well, thank you again so much, George. Where can people follow you online? And
Uh,
what other non-Star Wars stories would you like to plug that you think Star Wars fans would enjoy?
yeah. So they can find me probably on Instagram is best at George Mann Author. I'm still on X Twitter as well at George_Mann. Other stories. Well, we talked a lot about mythology. I mentioned a book called Witchwood, which is a kind of supernatural influenced modern day crime mystery story, murder mystery story. That was the book that got me hired to write Star Wars when Mike Siglane read it. So there's 2 books in that series, Witchwood and Halloween. So if people are out there and they like kind of crime mystery stories with a bit of mythology in them, and they like the type of writing I do, then I would check them out.
Great. Well, thank you again, George. Can't wait to see what you have next in Tears of the Nameless and beyond in Star Wars. Have a great rest of your night. And thank you, everyone, for watching, and may the Force be with you.
Thanks, everyone.